My name is Harlan Wilmer. I am 68 years old, and I live alone in a small house on Elm Street in Columbus, Nebraska. I worked as a railroad mechanic for 37 years until I retired 5 years ago. My wife, Evelyn, died 3 years ago, and since then, the house has seemed too big and quiet. I have a daughter, Cordelia, who is 32 years old and works as a saleswoman in a clothing store downtown. She is married to Barclay Crane, who sometimes moonlights as a taxi driver when he feels like it. They live in a rented apartment on the other side of town. I also have a brother, Dexter, who is 3 years younger than me. He is a retired sergeant and lives in Grand Island, an hour's drive from here. That's my family and that's my life. Quiet, measured, but sometimes lonely. That morning, I woke up early as usual. My railroad habit hadn't gone anywhere. I got up at 6:30, even if there wasn't much to do. Outside the window, it was mid-September. The leaves on the maple tree in the yard were already starting to turn yellow, and the morning air had turned cool. I got up, stretched, and felt my joints ache. My age was making itself felt. In the bathroom, I washed my face with cold water and shaved with an old safety razor that I had been using for 20 years. It's a shame to buy modern disposable razors. They work worse and cost more. I had oatmeal with raisins for breakfast and drank coffee from an old ceramic mug that Evelyn had given me for my birthday many years ago. The mug had the inscription, "To the best husband in the world" on it. The letters were almost worn away, but I still only drank from it. After breakfast, I turned on the morning news but didn't really listen to it. It was all about politics and problems in big cities. We didn't have those kinds of problems in our little Columbus. Then I walked around the house to check that everything was in order. Evelyn and I bought the house 30 years ago, when Cordelia was 2 years old. It's small, one story with 3 bedrooms, a living room, kitchen, and bathroom. The lot isn't very big, but it's enough for a small garden and a garage. Over the years, we've had to replace and repair a lot of things in the house: the roof, siding, half the plumbing. But the house was sturdy, well built, and would last another 20 years without major investment. He looked in the refrigerator and realized it was time to go grocery shopping. There was only half a jar of peanut butter, a few slices of stale bread, a carton of milk, and a piece of cheese left. There were frozen vegetables in the freezer, but I was tired of eating only vegetables. I needed to buy meat, chicken, maybe fish. I put on some old jeans and a plaid shirt and grabbed the keys to my pickup truck. My car was old, from the 90s, but reliable. It was a blue Ford that I had bought secondhand 10 years ago. During that time, the mileage hadn't increased much. I mainly drove around town, sometimes to visit my brother in Grand Island. The engine ran smoothly, the transmission didn't malfunction, only the paint was chipped in places and one bumper was dented. I hit a pole in the parking lot in winter. The Family Mart store was a 10-minute drive from my house in the city center. The building is modern, built about 5 years ago when the old store was demolished. Inside, everything is shiny and bright, and the air conditioners work even in the fall. I liked the old store better. It was cozier, the clerks knew all the customers by name, and you could chat about the weather or the latest news. The new store is staffed mainly by young girls who stare at their phones and barely say hello. I took a basket at the entrance and followed my usual route. First, dairy products. I bought a liter of milk, a pack of butter, a dozen eggs, and a large block of cheese. Then I headed to the meat department. Behind the counter stood Dave Morgan, a man in his 50s who had been working as a butcher for many years. We knew each other. His father also worked on the railroad. "Hi, Harlan," Dave greeted me, wiping his hands on his apron. "How's it going?" "Fine, Dave. What meat would you recommend?" "The pork is good today, very fresh, or you could get some beef for roasting. It was delivered yesterday." I bought a piece of pork and some ground beef. Then I went to the produce section and picked up some potatoes, onions, carrots, and tomatoes. The apples were expensive, but I bought a kilo. I like to eat an apple in the evening while watching TV. I was looking for tomato paste in the canned goods section when I heard a familiar voice. "Good morning, Harlan." I turned around and saw Imogen Brody, my neighbor who lives 3 houses down from me. She is a woman of about 55, thin, with gray hair pulled back into a neat bun. She has been working at the city library for 20 years, knows all the residents of the city and all the local news. She wears thick glasses and is very nearsighted, but she has a calm, friendly personality. True, she likes to talk and sometimes repeats rumors, but there is no malice in it. Good morning, Imogen. How are things at the library? Everything is as usual. Readers come and take books. Young people are more interested in the internet, but the older generation still reads. How are you? Aren't you bored on your own? I'm used to it now. I've got enough to do around the house, and I've got friends. Imogen adjusted her glasses and looked around, as if to make sure no one was listening. Then she leaned closer and lowered her voice. Listen, Harlan, I don't want to gossip, but I think you should know. Last night I saw your son-in-law near the Red Lantern bar. It was around 10 o'clock. I put a can of tomato paste in my basket and looked at her intently. Imogen wasn't the type to make up stories for fun. Working in the library had taught her to be precise and accurate, but her eyesight isn't great, even though her glasses help. So what? Maybe he stopped for a beer after work. Harlan? He was drunk. Not just tipsy, but drunk. He was staggering, talking loudly to someone on the street, and almost fell over when he was walking to his car. I was just passing by, coming back from my sister's. I felt uncomfortable. The Red Lantern is not the most respectable establishment in our town. It's located on the outskirts near the industrial zone and is frequented mainly by factory workers and those who want to get drunk cheaply and away from prying eyes. Decent family people don't go there. Are you sure it was Barkley? Absolutely sure. Harlan, I've known Barkley for several years, ever since he married Cordelia. He's tall, with dark hair, and always wears that denim jacket. And his car was parked there, that old blue Chevrolet. I didn't remember the license plate number, but I recognized the car for sure. Imogen spoke confidently, without hesitation. And she really did know everyone in the neighborhood. Working at the library and living in the same area for 20 years had done their job. Maybe he had some business there? Was he giving someone a ride or something like that? Harlan, he was alone and dead drunk. He barely made it to his car. I even thought about going over to see if he needed help, but then I got scared. You know how unpredictable drunk people can be? We were silent for a moment. I imagined Barkley, drunk and staggering around that shady bar, and I felt sick. Cordelia deserves a better husband. Thanks for telling me, Imogen. I'll keep that in mind. I don't want to cause any trouble, Harlan. I just thought your father should know. Cordelia is such a good girl, always polite and friendly. It would be a shame if she had problems with her husband. I understand, but so far these are just suspicions. Maybe he really did have business there. Imogen shrugged, but her eyes showed doubt. Maybe. But be careful, Harlan. Alcoholism is a serious disease, and it affects the whole family. We said goodbye and I finished my shopping, but I was in a bad mood. My thoughts kept returning to Imogen's words. On the way home, I caught myself thinking about Barkley and his possible alcohol problems several times. At home, I put the groceries away, putting everything in the refrigerator and freezer, but I couldn't relax. Imogen's words kept me from focusing on my household chores. Several times I went to the phone, wanting to call Cordelia, but I didn't know what to say. Accuse my husband of drinking based on the words of a neighbor? That would be wrong. But on the other hand, Imogen was not an enemy of our family. Moreover, she had always been kind to Cordelia, often asking about her affairs and taking an interest in her work. Why would she make up such stories? I decided to call my daughter after all, but cautiously, without revealing my suspicions. I dialed the number on the old landline in the kitchen. I also had a cell phone, but at home I preferred to use the regular one. Hello, Dad? Cordelia's voice sounded a little tired but friendly. Hi, sweetheart. How are you? How's work at the store? Everything's fine. Yesterday was Saturday. There were a lot of people. My feet are aching. But it's okay. I'm used to it now. What's up? You rarely call in the morning. I paused for a second, thinking about how best to start the conversation. Nothing special. Just missed you. Wanted to hear your voice. How's Barkley? Working? Working. He was driving late into the night, picking up passengers. He was very tired, came home and went straight to bed. Why, did something happen? I realized I needed to be more direct, but careful. Cordelia, did Barkley have any business in the industrial zone last night? What business? Why do you ask? Just wondering. Imogen Brody said she saw him near the Red Lantern. She said he was, well, not very sober. There was a pause on the line. I could hear Cordelia breathing, clearly thinking about her answer. Dad, Imogen is old and can't see well even with her glasses on. She probably mistook him for someone else. Barkley came home tired but sober. We even talked a little before bedtime. Are you sure he wasn't near the Red Lantern? I'm sure he wasn't. Dad, why would he go there? He works as a taxi driver. He has set routes. He takes people from the city center to the suburbs, sometimes to the airport. What would he do near that bar? My daughter's voice sounded convincing, but I heard some tension in it. Maybe she herself wasn't entirely sure about her husband's words. Okay, sweetheart. I was just asking. Maybe Imogen really did make a mistake. Of course she did. Dad, don't listen to the neighbors' gossip. Everything is fine between Barkley and me. He's a good husband. He works. He brings money home. He doesn't drink or fool around. What more could you want? You're right. Sorry for bothering you with such nonsense. It's okay. Just don't worry about nothing. You know how it is in small towns. People get bored and start making stuff up. We talked a little more about work, the weather, and plans for the weekend. Cordelia invited me to visit her the following weekend and said she would bake my favorite apple pie. I agreed and we said goodbye. After talking to my daughter, I felt a little better, but my doubts hadn't completely disappeared. Cordelia sounded convincing, but something in her voice was alarming. Maybe she was starting to suspect her husband herself, but didn't want to admit it. The rest of the day passed as usual. I read the newspaper and watched the news on TV. After lunch, I did some work in the garden, trimmed the bushes near the house, watered the tomatoes and peppers, and raked the fallen leaves from the path. Physical work always helped me think, and by evening I had come to the conclusion that it was too early to draw any conclusions. I needed more information. Around 5 o'clock in the evening, Alden Tucker, my best friend since school, called. We had been friends for over 50 years, went to school together, served in the Army together, albeit in different units. Then I went to work for the railroad, and he became a mailman. Alden was 2 years older than me and had just turned 70 this year, but he looked younger than his age. Harlan, are you going to the football game today? He asked, as always, without preamble. Our school team is playing the Shelby team. They say they've got some strong players. Alden was an avid fan of the local school team. He had been widowed 10 years ago and had no children, so we spent most of our free time together. We went to school football games, played checkers in his garage, and sometimes went fishing on the lake outside of town. In the winter, we watched hockey on TV and argued about which team was better. Of course I'll go. What time does the game start? At 7 in the evening. Shall we meet at the stadium at 6:30? Buy some popcorn, I'll bring a thermos of coffee and sandwiches, I agreed, and after dinner drove to the school stadium. There was still half an hour before the game started, but I didn't want to be late. The parking lot near the stadium was already half full. Pickups, cars, a few motorcycles. In our town, school football was one of the main entertainments in the fall. Alden was already waiting for me at the stadium entrance. He was wearing his favorite plaid jacket and a baseball cap with the local team's logo. He was holding a large thermos and a bag of food. Just like always, he said when I approached. Not a minute early, not a minute late. We bought tickets for $5 each and went to the stands. We chose seats in the middle, not too high and not too low. From here, we had a good view of the entire field and could hear the coach's commands. There was a large crowd of about 300 people, maybe more. Most of them were the players' parents, grandparents, and a few young couples. There was also a group of high school students who came to support their classmates. The atmosphere was festive, and everyone was looking forward to a good game. The teams took the field to the applause of the stands. Our guys looked confident, tall, strong guys, many of whom had been playing on the team for more than a year. The Shelby team also looked serious, with players of roughly the same level. The game started at 7 p.m. sharp. The first quarter passed without any touchdowns as the teams studied each other and the coaches tested different tactics. In the second quarter, our team scored the first touchdown after a beautiful combination, and the stands erupted with cheers. During the break between the second and third quarters, Alden and I bought hot coffee and popcorn. The evening was cool, but our jackets were enough. The Millers, Alden's neighbors, were sitting next to us. We said hello and talked a little about the game. "We've got a good team this year," Mr. Miller said. "Maybe they'll make it to the state championship." "Yeah, the quarterback is strong," Alden agreed, "and the defense is working well." At that moment, I decided to tell Alden about my conversation with Imogen. We stepped aside so no one could hear us. "Listen, Alden, I want to ask you about something. This morning, Imogen Brody told me a strange story." "What was it?" "She said she saw Barkley drunk near the Red Lantern last night. She said he could barely stand up." Alden frowned. He knew everyone in our neighborhood from working as a mailman for many years, and I always valued his opinion. "Imogen isn't the type to make up gossip," he said slowly. "She's a neat woman, attentive. If she says she saw it, then she saw it. But Cordelia says that Barkley worked late yesterday and came home sober. So either Imogen is mistaken, or Cordelia doesn't know the whole truth, or—" Alden didn't finish his sentence, but I understood what he meant. "Or Cordelia knows but doesn't want to admit it." "Exactly. Harlan, I don't know this Barkley very well, but I've seen him driving a taxi a few times. He doesn't work regularly, that's for sure. I mean, sometimes he does, sometimes he doesn't. And the Red Lantern is not a place for family men." We paused, watching the teams prepare for the third quarter. "What do you think I should do?" I asked. "Nothing yet. One incident isn't enough to draw conclusions. Maybe it really is just a coincidence. But if you hear anything else like that, then it's time to have a serious talk with your daughter. What if she doesn't want to listen? Then we'll have to take different action. But I hope it won't come to that." The third quarter began, and we returned to watching the game. The Shelby team tied the score with a touchdown early in the quarter. Then our team took the lead again, but our opponents didn't give up. By the end of the third quarter, the score was 7-7. The last quarter was the most intense. Both teams played with total commitment. The coaches shouted from the sidelines, and the stands cheered loudly. 5 minutes before the end, our team scored the decisive touchdown after intercepting a pass, and the stadium erupted in applause. The game ended with a score of 14-7 in our favor. Everyone was happy, the players hugged each other on the field, and the coach raised his arms in victory. Alden and I were also happy, clapping and cheering along with everyone else. After the game, people stayed for another half hour. Everyone discussed the best moments, praised the players, and made plans for the next games. Alden and I stood in the parking lot and talked to other fans, teachers from the school, parents of players, retirees like us. "It was a great game," said Tom Anderson, the father of one of the players. "My son intercepted 2 passes." "Yes, the boy plays well," I agreed. "A promising defender." We talked a little more about football. Then Alden suggested we go to Maisie's Diner for coffee and a slice of pie. But I declined. I wanted to go home to my chair and TV. It had been an eventful day, full of excitement, and I'm not getting any younger. "See you tomorrow then," said Alden. "Maybe we can go to the lake and go fishing? We'll see what the weather's like. If it doesn't rain, then why not?" At home, I made some tea with honey, turned on the evening news, and tried to relax in my favorite chair. But my thoughts kept returning to my conversation with Imogen and Alden's words. Could it be that Barkley really does have a drinking problem? And if so, what should I do about it? I always thought Cordelia could have found a better husband. Barkley is a nice guy, polite, not a bully, but he doesn't have any particular merits. He works as a taxi driver from time to time, has no ambitions, no plans for the future. They live in a rented apartment, don't have children yet, and can't save any money. My daughter is smart, beautiful, graduated from college, and could have a better life. But Cordelia loves him, and that's what matters, as I've always told myself. You can't buy love with money, and not everyone is lucky enough to find their soulmate. Evelyn and I were lucky. We lived together for almost 40 years and never had a serious argument. But that's not the case for everyone. As I went to bed, I decided to forget about the bar for now. Tomorrow is a new day, and maybe all my suspicions will turn out to be unfounded. Maybe Imogen was really mistaken, and Barkley just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. That happens. But somewhere deep down, I felt that this was only the beginning. Something told me that the problems with my son-in-law were just starting. The next morning, I woke up earlier than usual. I had restless sleep, strange dreams about Cordelia and Barkley. I got up, washed, had breakfast, and decided to do some housework to distract myself from yesterday's thoughts. I started by cleaning the garage. I had been meaning to sort through the old stuff that had been piling up there for years. In the garage was my pickup truck, several boxes of tools, an old lawnmower, and a pile of junk. Boxes of Christmas decorations that Evelyn bought every year, old furniture that was a shame to throw away, Cordelia's bike that she rode to school on. All these things reminded me of the past, of times when the house was full of life and laughter. I spent 2 hours sorting through the boxes, throwing away things that were definitely no longer useful. I found old photos, Cordelia in kindergarten, our family on a picnic, Evelyn in her favorite blue dress. I leafed through the photos and thought about how quickly time passes and how much has changed. Around 11 in the morning, the phone rang. I wiped my hands on a rag and went into the house to answer it. Hello? Harlan, it's Dexter. How's it going, brother? Dexter's voice always sounded confident and firm. Military service had left its mark on his character. He was used to speaking clearly and to the point. After being discharged, he worked as a security guard at a factory, then retired and now lived alone in a small house in Grand Island. Hi, Dexter. Everything's fine. Business as usual. How are you? Yeah, everything's fine. Haven't seen you in a while. Thought I'd visit you over the weekend. Maybe we could go fishing together, like in the old days. Dexter was 3 years younger than me, but he looked older. Military service, then working as a security guard, all of that had taken a toll on his health, but his character remained strong, and I always knew I could rely on him. Sure, come on over. It'll be great to see you. Great. How's Cordelia? How are the young ones doing? I paused for a second, not sure whether to tell Dexter about yesterday's incident with Imogen. Everything seems fine. They're working, living their lives. And her husband? Barkley, I think? Yes, Barkley. He works as a taxi driver. I heard a note of caution in Dexter's voice. Harlan, are you sure he's okay? I don't like that guy. The last time I saw him, he seemed unreliable. Why do you think that? I don't know. Intuition, I guess. His eyes dart around, his hands shake. And anyway, what kind of man works from time to time? A normal man should have a steady job. A plan for the future. I thought about Imogen's words and decided to tell my brother after all. Dexter, can you come over today? I want to talk to you about something. What's wrong? Nothing, probably nothing. But I'll tell you when I see you. Okay, I'll leave in an hour. I'll be at your place by lunchtime. After talking to Dexter, I felt calmer somehow. My brother always had a good understanding of people, and I valued his opinion. If Barkley really had problems, Dexter would help me figure out what to do. I made dinner, fried pork with potatoes and made a tomato salad. Dexter liked simple, hearty food. When we were young, we often cooked together when our parents went to visit relatives and left us at home. At 12:30, I heard the sound of an engine in the yard. I looked out the window and saw Dexter's old black pickup truck. My brother got out of the car, straightened up, and walked toward the house. He was wearing jeans and a plaid shirt with a baseball cap on his head. He looked the same as always, fit and military-like. Hi, Harlan, he said, climbing the porch steps. Hi, brother. Come on in. Lunch is ready. We hugged, as we always did when we met. Dexter was the only close relative I had left. My parents had died many years ago, and I had no other brothers or sisters. Over lunch, we talked about all sorts of things. The weather, the news, fishing. Dexter told me he had bought some new tackle and wanted to try fishing at a new spot that had been recommended to him. I told him about yesterday's football game. After lunch, we sat on the porch with coffee, and I told Dexter about my conversation with Imogen. So you saw him drunk near the Red Lantern? Dexter asked, frowning. Yes, and Cordelia says he was working and came home sober. I see. What do you think? I don't know. Imogen isn't a liar, but she could be wrong. And Cordelia is defending her husband, which is natural. Dexter paused, looking out at the street. Harlan, I'll be honest with you. I didn't like this Barkley guy from the start. When Cordelia brought him over to meet us, I knew right away he wasn't our kind of person. Why? He has this uncertain look in his eyes. And his hands shake, did you notice? Plus, he's always lying about little things. He exaggerates his work achievements and talks about unrealistic plans. I recalled several encounters with Barkley, and realized that Dexter was right. My son-in-law did often embellish his achievements and make unrealistic plans. But Cordelia loves him. Love is good, but it shouldn't be blind. If the guy has a drinking problem, it's serious. And sooner or later, it will affect my daughter. At that moment, an old blue car drove into the yard and stopped near the house. I recognized Barclay's Chevrolet. "Speak of the devil," Dexter muttered. Cordelia and Barclay got out of the car. Both had grim expressions on their faces and were carrying bags and packages. Cordelia looked upset, and Barclay looked sullen and angry. "Dad," Cordelia said as she climbed the porch steps, "can we talk?" "Of course, sweetheart. Come on in." "Hi, Barclay." Barclay nodded in response but said nothing. He looked unkempt, stubble on his face, wrinkled clothes, red eyes, and he smelled bad, a mixture of sweat, tobacco, and something else. We went into the house and sat down in the living room. Cordelia looked as if she were about to cry. "What happened?" I asked. "Dad, we've been evicted from our apartment," Cordelia said in a quiet voice. "The landlord said we have to move out by tomorrow morning." "Why?" Cordelia looked at Barclay, but he remained silent and stared at the floor. "We owe 3 months' rent. We couldn't pay because Barclay didn't have much work." I looked at my son-in-law, but he still avoided my gaze. "Have you found a new place to live?" "Not yet. We thought maybe we could stay with you for a few days until we find something." I knew I couldn't refuse my daughter, but at the same time, I felt like I was getting myself into something unpleasant. "Of course, stay. Cordelia's room is free, and I'll make up the sofa in the living room for Barclay." "Thanks, Dad. We'll find something quickly. We won't be a bother for long." Barclay finally looked up and looked at me. "Thanks," he said briefly. His voice was hoarse and unpleasant. Dexter had been silent all this time, but I could see that he was watching Barclay closely. It was a military habit, to study people, to understand their intentions. "Okay, let's bring in your things," I said. "We'll help you get settled in." We took several bags and boxes out of the car. There weren't many things, but they all looked cheap and worn. Cordelia took her things to the old room, and I put Barclay's bags in the living room. In the evening, Dexter left for home, promising to come back in a few days. "Keep a close eye on them," he said to me as he left, "and if anything's wrong, call me right away." After dinner, Cordelia went to bed, tired from the move. Barclay sat down in the kitchen and took a bottle of cheap whiskey out of his bag. "Do you mind if I have a drink?" he asked. "It's been a tough day." I couldn't forbid a grown man from drinking in my house, even though I didn't approve of it. "It's up to you," I replied. Barclay poured himself half a glass of whiskey and drank it in one gulp. Then he poured another. "Harlan, don't think badly of us," he said. "We've just had a bit of bad luck. There's not much work, and we're out of money. It happens. I understand. The main thing is that you get back on your feet. We will. We definitely will. I have plans," but I didn't hear any confidence in his voice. Half an hour later, he finished the bottle and went to bed, barely able to stand. The next day, the same thing happened. In the afternoon, Barclay drove off somewhere in his car, saying he was looking for work or a new place to live. Cordelia went to work at the store, and in the evening, they sat in the kitchen again and drank. On the first evening, it was whiskey. On the second, cheap vodka. They both drank, although Cordelia less. But by 9 o'clock in the evening, they were both noticeably drunk. "Dad, don't worry," Cordelia said to me when I looked into the kitchen. "We're just relaxing a little, relieving stress." But I could see that it wasn't just relaxation. They drank quickly, greedily, as if they were escaping from something, and they talked louder and louder, laughing for no reason. On the third day, the situation got even worse. Barclay came home around 6 in the evening, already tipsy. Apparently, he had stopped at a bar somewhere along the way. "How's work?" I asked him. "Everything's fine," he replied, but his speech was already slurred. "I'll definitely get a job tomorrow." They promised, but I didn't believe a word he said. In the evening, they were drinking in the kitchen again, and their voices were getting louder and louder. I was sitting in the living room watching TV, but I couldn't concentrate on the program. I could hear their drunken conversations, laughter, and sometimes swearing. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, the phone rang. It was my neighbor, Imogen. "Harlan, sorry to call so late," she said, "but is something going on over there?" The music is loud and I can hear voices. I realized that the neighbors were starting to complain, and that was bad. I'm sorry, Imogen. My daughter and her husband are visiting. I'll ask them to keep it down. Okay, I have to get up early for work tomorrow, and I want to get some sleep. I went to the kitchen and asked Cordelia and Barkley to keep it down. Sure, Dad, Cordelia said. We didn't mean to disturb you. But half an hour later, the noise started again. They turned on the radio and started dancing in the kitchen, laughing loudly and singing something. I went to bed with a heavy heart. I realized that the situation was getting out of control, but I didn't know what to do. I couldn't kick my daughter out, but it was becoming increasingly difficult to tolerate her behavior. On the fourth day, things got even worse. In the morning, I found empty bottles and leftover food on the kitchen table. The sink was full of dirty dishes, and cigarette butts were scattered on the floor. The house looked like a drug den. Cordelia left for work early without eating breakfast. She looked terrible, pale with red eyes and trembling hands. Barkley woke up only at lunchtime, drank coffee, and drove off somewhere again. I cleaned the kitchen, washed the dishes, and aired out the house. But the smell of alcohol and tobacco had seeped into the walls, and it was difficult to get rid of it. In the evening, history repeated itself. Barkley came back drunk, and Cordelia also drank after work. They sat in the kitchen again, drinking and talking loudly. I knew that this couldn't go on. The house was turning into a den of iniquity. The neighbors were starting to complain, and my daughter was drinking herself to death before my eyes. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. I decided to call Dexter tomorrow morning and ask for advice. My brother is in the military. He knows how to deal with difficult situations. In the meantime, I had to be patient and hope that the situation would somehow resolve itself. But deep down, I knew that this was only the beginning and that even bigger problems lay ahead. Another week passed, and the situation at home was getting worse. Cordelia and Barkley continued to drink every night, turning my kitchen into some kind of tavern. In the mornings, I would find empty bottles, cigarette butts, and leftover food. My daughter went to work sporadically, was often late, and Barkley stopped even pretending to look for a job. The neighbors began to complain more and more often. Not only Imogen called, but also the Millers who lived across the street and old Mr. Hale from the house opposite. They all said the same thing. It was too noisy in my house in the evenings, with loud music and drunken shouting and laughter. I tried several times to talk to my daughter and son-in-law, asking them to be quieter and not disturb the neighbors. Cordelia promised each time that they would be more careful, but the next day it all happened again. And Barkley stopped talking to me altogether, just mumbling something incomprehensible in response to my requests. On Friday evening, our school team was playing against the Norfolk team. Alden called in the morning to remind me about the game. Harlan, are you going to the football game today? They say the Norfolk team is strong. It will be interesting to watch. I hesitated. I didn't want to leave Cordelia and Barkley at home, but I didn't want to sit at home listening to their drunken conversations either. I don't know, Alden. I have guests here. It's awkward to leave. Come on, they're adults. They'll figure it out. And the game promises to be interesting. In the end, I decided to go. I wasn't doing any good at home anyway, and a little distraction wouldn't hurt. Before leaving, I glanced into the kitchen, where Cordelia and Barkley were already sitting with a bottle of vodka. I'm going to the football game, and I said. I'll be back around 10. Okay, Dad, Cordelia replied without looking up. We'll sit here and not bother anyone. But I could see that they had already had quite a bit to drink, even though it was only 7 in the evening. Barkley could barely sit on his chair, swaying from side to side. Maybe you shouldn't drink anymore. I tried. Dad, we're adults, Cordelia snapped. Don't tell us what to do. Her tone was so sharp that I was taken aback. My daughter had never spoken to me like that before. Okay, I said. Just keep it down. The neighbors are complaining. Barkley raised his head and looked at me with cloudy eyes. Let the neighbors mind their own business, he muttered. It's none of their business what we do. I realized it was useless to argue and left for the stadium with a heavy heart. The game was really interesting. The teams were evenly matched, and the score changed several times. In the end, our team won by a narrow margin, 21-17. Alden was thrilled, and we discussed the best moments of the game at length. After the game, as usual, we went to Maisie's snack bar for coffee. There we met a few more acquaintances and talked about the game and the team's plans for the season. Time flew by, and I didn't get home until around 10:30. As I was approaching the house, I realized that something was wrong. There were several unfamiliar cars in the yard, an old red Honda, a beat-up black pickup truck, and some other wreck with one bumper missing. Loud music was coming from the house, and I could hear drunken voices and laughter. I parked and walked to the house. Empty beer cans, cigarette butts, and some trash were scattered on the porch. The front door was wide open, even though it was a cool evening. When I entered the house, I saw a scene that made my eyes darken. There were 8 or 10 people I didn't know sitting in the living room and kitchen. They were all drunk as skunks. There were bottles of vodka, whiskey, and beer on the table. The floor was littered with cigarette butts, empty cans, and food scraps. Cordelia was sitting on the sofa, hugging some unfamiliar woman, both of them giggling and humming something. Barkley stood in the middle of the room with a bottle in his hand, telling a story and gesturing wildly. The other guests were sprawled out on chairs and on the floor. The music was so loud that they didn't notice me right away. Only when I turned off the player did everyone turn in my direction. "Oh, look, Daddy's here," Barkley yelled and laughed. "Harlan, meet my friends." He pointed to the group, and everyone laughed as if he had said something very funny. "What's going on here?" I asked, trying to sound calm. "A party, Dad," Cordelia said, hiccuping. "We invited some friends." "Meet them." The friends looked the part. Men in their 30s and 40s, unshaven, in dirty clothes. The women were younger but just as unkempt. They were all clearly from local bars and dive joints. "Cordelia, I need to talk to you," I said. "Later, Dad." "We have guests." One of the men, a burly guy with tattoos on his arms, got up from his chair and approached me. "Are you the owner of this house?" he asked, staggering. "Yes." "Then don't disturb people's rest." "Go to your room." I was struck by this guy's audacity. In my own house, some drunk bum was telling me what to do. "This is my house," I said firmly, "and I demand that you all leave immediately." The guy with the tattoos laughed. "Did you hear that, guys? The old man is kicking us out." The whole group burst out laughing. Barkley staggered over to me. "Harlan, don't be a downer. Go to your bedroom and we'll hang out here a little longer." "Get your friends out of here right now," I said, "or I'll call the police." Barkley's face darkened. "The police? Who are you to threaten us? This is our house now, too." "Barkley's right, Dad," Cordelia interjected. "We live here. We have the right to invite friends over." I couldn't believe my daughter was saying such things. Alcohol had completely changed her. "Cordelia, come to your senses. You can see what's going on." "Nothing's going on. We're just having fun. You're an old bore who doesn't understand how young people live." My daughter's words hit me like a slap in the face. She had never spoken to me like that before. "All right, enough talk," said the guy with the tattoos. "Old man, either you leave on your own or we'll carry you out." He took a step toward me, and I realized that I couldn't physically handle them. This guy was twice as young and twice as strong as me. "Okay," I said, "but I'm still calling the police." "Go ahead," Barkley laughed. "Just don't forget to tell them that your daughter doesn't listen to you." I went to my bedroom, but I wasn't going to give up. I locked the door and sat by the window, thinking about what to do. Call the police? But what would I tell them? That my daughter had brought friends home? The music blared at full volume again. I could hear drunken shouts, laughter, and the sound of breaking glass. One of the guests must have broken something in the kitchen. Around midnight, the doorbell rang. I heard someone from the group go to answer it. "Good evening," Imogen's familiar voice rang out. "Can I speak to the owner of the house?" "Who's asking?" a man's voice replied rudely. "I'm a neighbor. I need to talk to Mr. Wilmer. The old man is sleeping. Don't disturb him, but you're being very loud. It's late. People can't sleep." I wanted to go out and talk to Imogen, but the door was locked from the outside. Apparently, someone from the group had turned the key when I went to the bedroom. "Listen, lady," I heard Barkley's voice. "Go home and mind your own business." "I demand that you turn it down immediately," Imogen said more firmly, "or I'll call the police." "Oh, she'll call the police," someone in the group yelled. "Guys, the lady wants to turn us into the police." I heard drunken voices, noise, and the sound of a struggle. Imogen was shouting something, asking them to let her go. "Don't touch me! Let me go! Help!" I rushed to the door, trying to open it, but it wouldn't budge. Someone had definitely locked me out. "Hey!" I yelled, banging on the door. "Leave my neighbor alone!" But no one heard me. The music was blaring. The group was making noise, and Imogen's screams were getting weaker. A few minutes later, I heard the door slam and footsteps in the yard. I looked out the window and saw several people from the group dragging Imogen to the garage. The poor woman tried to resist, but the odds were stacked against her. "No, let me go home," she screamed. But the drunken group just laughed. They opened the garage door, pushed Imogen inside, and locked her in. "You'll stay here until you wise up," Barkley yelled. "You'll learn not to stick your nose in other people's business." I was furious. How dare they treat an elderly woman like that? I tried to break the bedroom window to get out, but the frame was old and sturdy, and I didn't have anything heavy at hand. The group returned to the house and continued drinking. The music blared again, and drunken songs could be heard. From the garage came the muffled cries of Imogen, begging to be let out. Around 1 o'clock in the morning, the noise in the house grew even louder. Someone suggested going for a drive, and everyone liked the idea. "Let's have a race," Barkley yelled. "Right down the street." "Great idea," someone agreed. "Whoever gets to the intersection first." I heard car doors slamming and engines starting. I looked out the window and saw a nightmare. 4 cars were lined up on the road. Drunk idiots were sitting behind the wheel, ready to race right down a residential street. "On your marks. Get set. Go!" someone yelled. The cars took off with a screech of tires. An old Honda immediately pulled ahead, followed by a black pickup truck, then the rest. They raced down the narrow street at breakneck speed, not thinking about the possibility of hitting someone or crashing into a house. On a turn, the Honda lost control. The car skidded, flew off the road, and crashed into Mr. Hale's fence at full speed. There was a crash of breaking boards and the sound of broken glass. The other cars also braked, but it was too late. The pickup truck drove into the flower bed opposite. The third car crashed into a pole, and the fourth stopped in the middle of the road with a dented fender. Drunk drivers and passengers climbed out of the wrecked cars. Everyone laughed as if something funny had happened, not a real disaster. "Did you see me flying?" yelled the Honda driver, covered in blood from his broken face. "Like a real race car driver." Mr. Hale's fence was completely demolished. His beautiful wooden fence, which he had been building all summer, was reduced to a pile of splinters and debris. The flower beds were trampled. The lawn was rutted. I knew it was a disaster. The neighbors would definitely call the police. There would be a scandal, possibly lawsuits. And my daughter and her husband were at the center of all this mess. The group continued to have fun in the yard for a while, discussing the race and the accidents. Then apparently they realized it was time to leave. Those whose cars were still running quickly gathered their things and drove away. The rest left on foot, leaving their wrecked cars right on the street. By 3 o'clock in the morning, everything had finally quieted down. Cordelia and Barkley had also apparently passed out from drinking. I tried opening the bedroom door again, and this time it gave way. The first thing I did was go to the garage to free Imogen. The poor woman was sitting in a corner on an old chair, shivering from cold and fear. "Imogen, it's okay. It's me, Harlan," I said, opening the door. "Harlan," she sobbed. "They locked me in here. Those drunken beasts." I helped her out of the garage and walked her to the house. Imogen was in shock, but physically unharmed. "I'm sorry," I said. "I couldn't do anything. They locked me up too." "Harlan, what's going on with your daughter?" she asked. "This isn't the Cordelia I know." "I don't know," I replied honestly. "Alcohol has changed her beyond recognition." Imogen went home, and I returned to mine and collapsed into an armchair. The house was trashed, the yard littered with rubbish, the street vandalized. And in the living room, my daughter and her husband were asleep, as if nothing had happened. I knew it was over. I couldn't and wouldn't put up with this anymore. Tomorrow morning, I would call Dexter and ask for help. It was time to take decisive action before things got even worse. I woke up at dawn after a sleepless night. My head hurt and my body felt tired, as if I hadn't slept for a week. I got up, went to the window, and looked out onto the street. The scene was depressing. Crashed cars were parked right on the road, Mr. Hale's fence was in pieces, and trash was scattered everywhere. I washed my face with cold water, shaved, and got dressed. I had to act quickly before the neighbors started calling the police, and they would definitely call when they saw such a mess. The house was deathly quiet. Cordelia and Barkley were still asleep, passed out from drinking. The living room and kitchen were in complete chaos, empty bottles, cigarette butts, food scraps, broken dishes. The smell of alcohol and tobacco had soaked into the walls that it was disgusting to breathe. The first thing I did was go out into the yard to assess the damage. The wrecked Honda was standing right in the ruins of Mr. Hale's fence. The windshield was shattered, the hood was dented, and fluid was leaking from the radiator. A black pickup truck was stuck in the flower bed opposite, its wheels deeply embedded in the ground. A third car had crashed into a telephone pole, which was now leaning at an angle. I knew that repairing all this would cost thousands of dollars. I didn't have that kind of money, and I wasn't going to pay for someone else's mess. Around 8 in the morning, Mr. Hale came out of the house across the street. He was a 70-year-old man who had worked as a mechanic his whole life and was now retired. When he saw the destruction, he stopped dead in his tracks. "My God!" he exclaimed. "What happened here?" I approached him, preparing for a difficult conversation. "Good morning, Walter. Sorry about the mess. Harlan, did a tornado hit here? My fence, my flower beds." Mr. Hale was on the verge of tears. He had spent the whole summer building that fence, sawing the boards himself, painting them, and installing them. And the flower beds had been planted by his late wife 10 years ago. "Walter, I'll explain everything and make up for it, I promise. But how did this happen? Who did this?" I couldn't tell him the truth, that my daughter and her drunk friends had been racing down the street. That would have been too humiliating. Some hooligans were causing trouble at night. I'm already thinking about how to deal with it. Are we going to call the police? That's what I was most afraid of. If the police came, an investigation would begin, and the whole truth would come out. Cordelia and Barkley would be arrested. There would be a trial, jail. My daughter would become a criminal. "Walter, let's not call the police for now. I'll find the culprits and make them pay for the damage. If nothing has changed by Monday, then you can call whoever you want." Mr. Hale shook his head but agreed. "All right, Harlan. I'll give you until Monday, but if there are no results by then, I'm calling the sheriff." Half an hour later, Imogen came out of the house. She looked terrible, pale with red eyes and rumpled clothes. When she saw me, she came closer. "Harlan, how are you? Are you okay?" "Yes, I'm fine." "How are you? Are you hurt?" "Not physically, but I'm still in shock. How could they do that? Lock an elderly woman in a garage." I was ashamed to look her in the eye. Imogen had always been a kind neighbor, helping when needed, never hurting anyone. And now this abuse. "Imogen, I'm sorry. I couldn't help you. They locked me in the bedroom too." "I understand. But what should I do now? Call the police?" "Please don't. Give me time to figure this out. I promise the culprits will be punished." Imogen looked at the destruction in the yard and shook her head. "Harlan, your daughter brought this on herself. Do you understand?" "I understand. And I'll take action. Good. But if something like this happens again, I will definitely contact the authorities. I can't live in fear in my own home." Imogen left, and I stood there amid the destruction, thinking about what to do next. I needed to talk to the other neighbors, convince them not to call the police, and buy some time. Next, the Millers came out of the house across the street. Jim and Barbara Miller, both retired, were calm, decent people. Seeing the wrecked cars and the destruction, they stopped in shock. "Harlan," Jim called out, "what happened here?" I approached them and repeated the same story about the hooligans. The Millers listened with disbelief. "Hooligans?" Barbara asked. "Where did they come from?" "This is a quiet neighborhood, probably from downtown. You know how young people like to cause trouble." "Did you see them?" Jim asked. "No, I was asleep. I woke up in the morning and saw all this mess." Jim went to inspect the wrecked cars, and Barbara leaned toward me and lowered her voice. "Harlan, could this have something to do with your guests? You had a very loud party last night." I realized that the neighbors weren't stupid and had guessed the connection between last night's drinking and the nighttime destruction. "Barbara, I give you my word that everything will be settled by Monday. Those responsible will pay for the damage and won't bother anyone else. And if they don't, then you can go to the police yourself." I won't object. Barbara looked me intently in the eyes and nodded. "Okay, we'll wait until Monday." By 10 in the morning, I had visited all the neighbors on the street and reached an agreement with each of them. Everyone agreed to wait until Monday, but warned that this was their last chance. If the situation didn't change by then, they would collectively go to the sheriff. When I got home, I saw that Cordelia was already awake and sitting in the kitchen with a cup of coffee. She looked terrible, pale, with bags under her eyes, her hands shaking. She had a bad hangover. "Good morning, Dad," she said hoarsely. "Good?" After what happened here? Cordelia looked around as if noticing the mess in the kitchen for the first time. "What's the big deal?" "It was just a party." "A party?" "Cordelia, your friends locked the neighbor in the garage. They raced down the street. They broke someone's fence." "I don't remember that," she muttered. "You're probably exaggerating." I couldn't believe my daughter was saying such things. Either she really didn't remember anything because she was drunk, or she was pretending. "Cordelia, go out into the yard and look at the street. Look at the mess your friends made." She reluctantly got up and went out onto the porch. Seeing the wrecked cars and the ruins of the fence, even in her state, she understood the scale of the disaster. "Oh my God," she whispered. "Is it really that bad?" "It's a disaster, Cordelia. The neighbors want to call the police. I had a hard time convincing them to wait until Monday." My daughter returned to the kitchen and sank into a chair. For the first time in weeks, I saw something resembling regret in her eyes. "Dad, I didn't want it to turn out this way." "But it did. And now we have to do something about it." At that moment, Barkley came out of the living room. He looked even worse than Cordelia. His eyes were red, his face was swollen, and his movements were unsteady. He reeked of alcohol and sweat. "What's all the shouting about so early in the morning?" he muttered, plopping down on a chair. "Your friends trashed the whole street," I said. "Now the neighbors are demanding compensation for the damage." Barkley shrugged. "Not our problem. Let them sort it out themselves." His dismissive attitude finally pushed me over the edge. "How is it not your problem? You brought these animals here." "Hey, watch your language," Barkley snapped. "They were normal people, just a little drunk." "Normal people don't lock elderly women in garages. Maybe the old woman asked for it?" She was minding her own business. I barely restrained myself from hitting him. How could he say that about Imogen, who was just asking for some quiet? I spent the whole day trying to tidy up the house. I cleaned up the trash, washed the dishes, and threw away empty bottles. Cordelia helped a little, but Barkley didn't participate in the cleaning at all. He lay on the couch all day, occasionally getting up to get a beer. By evening, the house was more or less tidy, but the smell of alcohol and tobacco still hung in the air, and the wrecked cars were still in the yard. I didn't know what to do with them. After dinner, I decided it was time to put an end to this story. My daughter and son-in-law had to leave my house. Immediately. "Cordelia, Barkley, we need to have a serious talk," I said as I walked into the living room. They were sitting on the couch in front of the TV. Barkley was holding a can of beer in his hand, apparently nursing a hangover. "What do we need to talk about?" Cordelia asked. "About the fact that it's time for you to move out." There was a moment of silence. Cordelia looked at me in surprise, and Barkley didn't even look up. "Dad, what are you talking about?" "We're just staying here temporarily until we find a place." "Cordelia, look what my house has become over the past few weeks. Daily drinking, rowdy behavior, and now yesterday's disgrace. But yesterday was an exception. It won't happen again. It won't because you're leaving here. Tomorrow." Barkley finally looked up and looked at me. "What if we don't want to?" The question sounded defiant, almost threatening. "What do you mean you don't want to?" "This is my house. I realized they weren't going to leave voluntarily. You are my guests, and I have the right to ask you to leave." Barkley got up from the sofa and took a step toward me. His movements were aggressive. "Listen, old man. My wife and I are staying here until we decide to leave, and no one will kick us out. This is my house, and I decide who lives here." "Your house?" Barkley laughed. "What do you think will happen if something happens to you?" "The house will go to Cordelia, and that means it will go to me too." The threat was clear, and I felt uneasy. This guy was capable of anything, especially when he was drunk. "Are you threatening me?" "I'm just explaining how things stand. We're staying here, and if you don't want any trouble, you'd better not interfere with how we want to live." Cordelia stood up and walked over to her husband. "Barkley's right, Dad. We're not going anywhere. This is our home now, too." I couldn't believe that my daughter was supporting her husband in such threats. "Cordelia, come to your senses. Do you hear what you're saying? I'm telling the truth." I'm tired of living in rented apartments, moving from place to place. Here we have a roof over our heads. But this is my house. I've lived here for 30 years. And you will continue to live here if you behave sensibly, said Barkley. And if not, he didn't finish the sentence, but the meaning was clear. If not, what? Barkley came up close to me. He was a head taller and much stronger. If not, you might have an accident. Old people often fall, hit their heads, break bones. Especially when they drink a lot. I don't drink. Not yet. But alcoholism is a hereditary disease. Look at your daughter. That last sentence hit me harder than all the threats. Barkley was saying outright that he had turned my daughter into an alcoholic. Get out of my house, I shouted. Get out now. Barkley laughed. Or what? Call the police? Tell them your daughter doesn't listen to you? He was right. The police weren't going to evict my daughter from my house, especially if she said I was a drunk and threatened her. Dad, calm down, Cordelia said. We're not strangers. We're family. After everything you've done, we won't throw any more parties. We promise. But I didn't believe a word they said. Realizing that it was useless to fight them openly, I went to my bedroom. I needed to think about what to do next. Staying in the same house with them was dangerous. Barkley was clearly ready to use force, and Cordelia supported him. Around 10 o'clock in the evening, I decided to call Dexter. My brother needed to know about the situation. Maybe he could advise me on what to do next. I dialed Dexter's home phone number. Hello, a familiar voice answered. Dexter, it's Harlan. Can you talk? Sure, what's going on? You sound strange. Dexter, I need your help. Serious help. What happened? I told my brother the whole story from the beginning. About how Cordelia and Barkley moved in with me, about the daily drinking, about yesterday's disaster with the drunk company, about Barkley's threats. Dexter listened silently, only occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished my story, my brother was silent for a few seconds. Harlan, this is a serious situation. This Barkley is dangerous. I understand, but what can I do? They don't want to leave voluntarily, and no one can force them out. By law, a daughter has the right to live in her father's house. So I'm just supposed to put up with their antics? No, there's another way. What is it? Dexter paused, thinking about his answer. Are they going anywhere tomorrow? Cordelia's going to work, and I don't know where Barkley's going. They usually leave in the morning and come back in the evening. Great. So I'll come over tomorrow afternoon. You and I are going to do something, what exactly? We'll change the locks on the house. While they're gone, the idea seemed risky to me. What if they come back and can't get in? Then they'll realize the game is over. Either they'll leave on their own, or they'll call the police. But the police rarely get involved in family disputes like this. What if Barkley tries to force his way into the house? Then we'll defend ourselves. I have a gun, and I have a license for it too. The thought that it might come to using a gun scared me. But living under the threat of a drunk psychopath was also impossible. Dexter, what if something goes wrong? Harlan, you're my brother. No one will intimidate you in your own home. If necessary, we'll see it through to the end. Dexter's voice had the same determination I remembered from childhood. When he made a decision, he saw it through to the end, no matter what. Okay, I'll be waiting for you tomorrow. I'll be there for dinner. And Harlan, don't say a word to them until tomorrow. Let them think you've given in. After talking to Dexter, I felt a little better. My brother wouldn't abandon me in my time of need. He would help me deal with the situation. Maybe tomorrow it would all be over, and I would be able to live peacefully in my own home again. But deep down, I knew it wouldn't be easy. Barkley wasn't the type to give up without a fight, and I didn't even want to imagine what he might do when he realized he was being kicked out. I woke up in the morning with a heavy feeling in my chest. Today, everything would be decided. Either Cordelia and Barkley would leave on their own, or they would have to be kicked out by force. I slept poorly, listening to the sounds coming from the living room all night, afraid that Barkley might burst into my bedroom. I got up at 6:30, washed my face, and quietly went to the kitchen. Cordelia and Barkley were still asleep. They had finished the rest of the vodka yesterday and passed out quite late. The house was filled with an oppressive silence, broken only by the ticking of the old clock in the hallway. I ate breakfast in silence, trying not to make any unnecessary noise. I had to wait until they left to go about their business, and then Dexter would arrive. My brother promised to be there by lunchtime, but I hoped he would come earlier. Around 9 in the morning, Cordelia woke up. She looked even worse than yesterday. Her face was gray, her eyes were bloodshot, and her hands were shaking from a hangover. She sat down in the kitchen and drank her coffee silently, without looking at me. "Good morning," I said. "Morning," she grumbled in response. "Are you going to work today?" "Yes, I have to be there at 10. "What about Barkley?" "I don't know. He said something about work, but I'm not sure." Cordelia finished her coffee and went to get ready. Soon she left the house without even saying goodbye. I saw through the window how she got on the bus and went to the city center. Barkley woke up around 11. He got up, drank beer straight from the can, and stood at the window for a long time, looking out at the street. Then he came over to me. "Old man, I need money," he said without preamble. "What for?" "Gasoline. I want to drive around town and look for a job." I knew he wasn't going to look for a job. Most likely he would go to the Red Lantern or some other bar. But giving him money meant getting rid of him for a few hours. "How much do you need?" $20 will do." I gave him a 20 from my wallet. Barkley took the money without even saying thank you and left in his beat-up car half an hour later. Left alone, I sat by the window and waited for Dexter. Time dragged on slowly. Every noise on the street made me jump. What if Cordelia or Barkley had returned? At 11:30, a familiar black pickup truck drove into the yard. Dexter had arrived earlier than promised. I went out to meet him and immediately noticed that my brother looked more composed and determined than usual. His military bearing was evident in his every movement. "Hi, Harlan," he said as he got out of the car. "Are they gone?" "Yes. Cordelia is at work, and Barkley has gone, who knows where." "Great. How much time do we have?" "Cordelia will be back around 6. Barkley could show up at any moment, but he usually hangs around somewhere for a long time." Dexter walked to the back of the pickup truck and took out a large bag. From the way he carried it, I could tell there was something heavy inside. "What's in there?" I asked. "New locks and a few other things," my brother replied as he entered the house. In the living room, Dexter opened the bag. Inside were 2 new locks, screwdrivers, a drill, and a gun in a holster. "Dexter, why the gun?" "Just in case. If this Barkley guy tries to break into the house, we need to be ready." My brother took out the gun and checked the bullets. "Do you have a gun license?" "Of course. Everything is legal." We started changing the locks. Dexter worked quickly and professionally. It was clear that his hands remembered their military training. First, we changed the lock on the front door, then on the back door. Dexter threw the old locks in the trash can. "Now only we know how to get into the house," he said, handing me the new keys. "What if they break a window?" "Then it will be a crime. Damage to property and unlawful entry. They can be arrested for that." The work took about 2 hours. When we finished, it was already 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Dexter hid his gun under his jacket but kept his hand near the holster. "Now we wait," he said, "and prepare for what comes next." "What if they call the police?" "Let them call. You're the owner of the house. You have the right to decide who lives here, and they're not registered here." We sat down in the living room and waited. Dexter was calm, but I was nervous. Various scenarios were running through my head, and most of them ended badly. Around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, I heard the sound of an engine in the yard. I looked out the window and saw Barkley's blue Chevrolet. "He's here," I said to my brother. "Great. Let's see what he's capable of." Barkley got out of the car, staggering. It was clear that he had been drinking heavily. He walked up to the front door and tried to open it with his key. The key didn't fit. "What the hell?" I heard him say through the door. Barkley tried again, then started yanking on the doorknob. The door wouldn't budge. "Hey!" he yelled. "Open up!" What's wrong with this lock? Dexter motioned for me to be quiet. We sat silently, not responding to his shouts. Barkley walked around the house and tried to open the back door. The key didn't fit either. Then he returned to the front door and began pounding on it with his fists. "Harlan, open the door! I know you're in there!" We remained silent. "You old bastard," Barkley yelled. "You think you can change the locks and I won't get in? I'll show you." He stepped away from the door and kicked it. The door shook but held. "Good locks," Dexter whispered. Barkley kicked the door a few more times, then ran to his car. He returned with a crowbar and began to break down the door. "That's enough," Dexter said, and got up from his chair. He walked up to the door and said loudly, "Barkley, stop breaking the door. Get off the property." "Who are you?" Barkley yelled. "This is my house too. This is my brother's house, and you don't live here anymore. Go to hell. I'm going to break this door down and show you both." The blows with the crowbar grew stronger. The door began to creak. Dexter took out his gun and released the safety catch. "Last warning," he shouted. "Stop breaking down the door and leave." "Go to hell, all of you," Barkley yelled and swung the crowbar at the door. The door cracked, and Barkley's hand appeared in the gap, trying to reach the lock from the inside. "That's enough," Dexter said. He opened the door with a sharp movement. Barkley, who was leaning against the door, fell forward and ended up inside the house. Seeing Dexter with a gun, he paused for a second. "Get out of here," Dexter said, pointing the gun at his brother-in-law. "Or what?" "Are you going to shoot me?" Barkley laughed. "You wouldn't dare." He swung the tire iron, aiming at Dexter. His brother took a step back. "Last time I'm telling you, get out." "Fuck you," Barkley yelled and lunged at Dexter with the tire iron. A shot rang out. Barkley screamed and fell to the floor, clutching his leg. Blood flowed from the wound. "You shot me," he yelled. "You shot me, you son of a bitch." "I warned you," Dexter said calmly, without lowering his gun. At that moment, Cordelia ran up to the house. She must have heard the shot and the screams. Seeing her bloodied husband on the floor, she rushed to him. "Barkley, what happened? Who shot you?" "Your father," Barkley shouted. "He hired a hitman." Cordelia turned to me with rage in her eyes. "Dad, what have you done? Are you crazy?" "Cordelia, he was breaking down the door with a crowbar. He was trying to attack us." "That's not true. He just wanted to come into the house." The daughter bent over her husband, trying to stop the bleeding. "We need to call an ambulance. He's bleeding to death." Dexter approached them and examined the wound. The bullet went right through. "No bone damage. He'll live." "How can you speak so calmly?" Cordelia shouted. "You maimed my husband." "Your husband attacked us with a weapon. It was self-defense." Cordelia stood up and came over to me. "Dad, how could you?" "That's Barkley, my husband." I looked at my daughter and realized I had lost her forever. Alcohol and that scoundrel had changed her completely. "Cordelia, he threatened me. He said something bad might happen to me. He was just nervous. Everyone gets nervous when they're kicked out of their home." "Out of my home. The one he turned into a den. It was our home too." I couldn't take it anymore. Too much pain had built up over the past few weeks. Humiliation, threats, destruction, and now accusations of something I wasn't guilty of. I swung my arm and slapped Cordelia, a sharp, hard slap that sent her flying to the side. "Enough!" I shouted. "Enough of these lies! Enough of defending this scoundrel!" Cordelia stood there holding her cheek, looking at me in horror. "You hit me," she whispered, "and I'll hit you again if you don't stop talking nonsense. That bastard turned you into an alcoholic. He turned my house into a den of iniquity, and you're still defending him. He's my husband. He's a criminal, and you're a criminal too for living with him." Barkley continued to moan on the floor, but the bleeding had slowed. Dexter took out his phone and called an ambulance. "The ambulance will be here in 10 minutes, he said. Cordelia sat down next to her husband again. "Hang in there, dear. The doctors will be here soon." Barkley looked at me with angry eyes. "You think this is over? I'm going to sue you for attempted murder." "Go ahead," Dexter replied calmly. "Explain to the judge why you broke someone else's door with a crowbar." 10 minutes later, the ambulance arrived. The doctors examined the wound, applied a bandage, and loaded Barkley onto a stretcher. Cordelia wanted to go with him to the hospital. "Wait," I said to her. "I have something to say." My daughter stopped and turned to me. "Cordelia, you have to choose between me and him. If you go with him, don't ever come back here again." "What are you saying?" "What I think. Either you stay here and get treatment for your alcoholism, or you leave with him forever." Cordelia looked at her husband, who was being loaded into the car, then at me. "I can't leave him. He's injured." "Then you've made your choice." "Dad." "No, Dad. You're no longer my daughter. Get out of my house and never come back." Tears streamed down Cordelia's cheeks. You can't do this. I'm your daughter. My daughter died when she drank herself to death and started defending that scumbag. Cordelia sobbed and ran to the ambulance. The doctors allowed her to sit next to her husband, and the car drove away. I stood on the porch and watched my daughter drive away, perhaps forever. Is it hard? Dexter asked, coming up to me. Yes, but there was no other way. She'll come back. When she sobers up and realizes what she's done. What if she doesn't come back? Then she's beyond saving. We went back into the house. We had to clean the blood off the floor, fix the door, and tidy everything up. Life went on, but now I was alone again. Dexter stayed with me for the night in case Barkley decided to come back with his friends for revenge. But no one came. Apparently, the hospital explained to my brother-in-law that attacking a private home could land him in jail. Late at night, I sat in my chair and thought about what had happened. The house was mine again. Silence had returned. But the price of that silence was too high. I had lost my daughter. Maybe Dexter is right, and she will come back. Maybe she will realize her mistakes and want to make amends. Or maybe I will never see her again. But one thing I knew for sure, I would never let anyone destroy my home and my life again. I am too old to go through this again.